어서오세요. Welcome back to the Casual Book Club. This is an asynchronous book club for mood readers and people who can't keep up with the hype. I'm your club president, and I'm here to host our second meeting with our next book. And this book today will be none other than Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop by Hwang Bo-Reum. I read the English translation, which was translated by Shanna Tan. The Korean version was first published in 2022, and the English translation was first published in 2023. For those who haven't heard about this book, it is about a new bookshop that opens in a neighborhood in Seoul called Hyunamdong, and the bookshop is aptly named the Hyunamdong Bookshop. So the book is about the bookshop owner and her journey, and it explores the lives of her and her customers. We get to know each character, and they weave like a thread through the story, and together those narratives form this book that stands like a record of a moment in time. There really isn't an overarching plot in this novel, and it really is a record of the separate lives and stories of these people, and it is centered around this bookshop and the bookshop owner. Okay, so that's the brief overview of the book, and that's really all you need to know before you even go and read the book itself. My personal experience with the book is that I heard about it through the translator Shanna Tan. So Shanna Tan is a Singaporean literary translator, and I had found out about her through Instagram, and this was back in like COVID times during 2020 when I first started my Instagram, and I did like language content. Or not say content lah. I was just on the language side of Instagram. There were a lot of polyglots, people who were learning different languages, and I was sort of in my languages phase at the time. I was on there and I was following a bunch of different people, and one of them was Shanna Tan. At the time, I knew that she posted her content about learning Korean, and sometimes she would post about books as well. And I didn't know that she did it as a job, because most people, I think, on language Instagram, they sort of do it as a hobby. And I didn't know that she was actually doing this as part of her job, or like it's part of her work. Because I think before she moved into literary translation, she did more professional translation. And then when I saw an Instagram story that she had posted saying that her first translation was coming out, I was like, oh, dang, okay, maybe I should go and check it out and support her. Actually, after the release of this book, there was news coverage of this book and her translations. And since this translation came out in 2023, I think she's had quite a number of other books that have come out, or there's been quite a lot of her translations that have come out. I think it's Marigold Mind Laundry. Yeah, Yeonamdong's Smiley Laundromat is another book that she has translated. Yeah, so there are 3 currently fiction translations, but she's also translated, apart from Korean to English, she has also translated from Chinese to English, and I believe she can also translate from the Japanese, but maybe that's more on the professional side. So I think it's super cool that we have a local translator that's, man, this phrase is a bit cringe, but it's like making waves, in this translation scene, especially when the Korean to English translation scene is not that big to begin with. So I think it's really cool, and I think I just wanted to support that. I went to the signing, and that was I have the signature here, it was in 2023. Yeah, and at the time, I had purchased this book, and I had given myself the excuse that it was my birthday present. So I read a little bit, and then I went for the signing and got to listen to a interview-ish, like a book talk with Shanna and the author, Hwang Bo-Reum, who appeared via video conferencing. And this was in the Ngee City Kinokuniya. And that was it the first time I attended a talk? It was definitely the first time that I attended a book signing. So that whole experience was really cool. And now I have this first book that's signed by the translator. The other cool thing is that I actually attended a talk with the author herself during last year's, and that was 2024. So last year's Singapore Writers Festival. And there was a talk about work-life balance, and the author was there, and then afterwards they actually did a book signing, and there was a huge line, and that particular talk I think was really popular, and most of the people were there for this book. So I think you can sort of tell the kind of impact and reach that this book had, even locally. Remember how I said that Hwang Bo-Reum did a signing after her work-life balance talk at the Singapore Writers Festival? Guess who didn't bring her book to the event? That's right, me. Honestly, I'm a bit bummed. Like, I already have the translator's signature, and it would have been like such flex. Oh man, but that's so cringe. But then again, right? I think it was really a missed opportunity to have a book signed by both the author and the translator. I don't know. Isn't this like a book collector's dream? I'm not even a book collector. Most of my books, if you know me well enough, come from the library. So these are one of the few instances where I've bought the book. Oh, and I could have gotten it signed, but I didn't. In my defense, I had an appointment afterwards anyway, so I wouldn't have been able to get the signature unless I blew off my appointment. So yeah, I'll just use that as an excuse. Okay, and then the kind of ironic thing as well is that at the point in time in which I went for the Writers' Festival, at the point in time in which I went for the signing, both times I hadn't finished reading the book. I swear, it was because life was getting in the way or something else. Like, I just read books that I own a lot slower than I read library books because there's no self-imposed deadline that I need to meet before I need to return the book or something. Because I own the book, then I'm like, oh yeah, I have forever to read it. Okay, but anyway, it's a normal problem that a lot of people have, right? The conclusion of this story, as you all might be able to tell from the fact that I am even convening this meeting about this book, is that I finally managed to finish it. And how? Well, I actually went to Korea for a personal trip in May or April of this year. And I thought, what a perfect time for me to bring it to Korea, and read it there with the Korean vibes all around me. Would you be surprised to hear that I picked up the book on the flight back? I managed to read, I think, at least 75% of it, and then I think I had maybe 5% left, and then I read it back home. Now that I've read it, here comes the part where I give my honest thoughts on the book. After divorcing myself from the kind of personal experiences and the really unique experiences that I've had with this book, including meeting the translator, listening to the author in person at an event, getting the book signed, and having the book come at different points in my life. What did I actually think? Upon my first reading of it, so I read like 50% of the way my first time in. So that was maybe in 2023. I read about 50%, and I felt like certain passages did resonate with me. But the reason why I didn't finish the book on the first attempt was also because the book is, as the kids say, no plot, all vibes. Because it really is about the lives of the characters in this bookstore and how their lives are unfolding at this point in time, right? There's no real central plot that is moving the story forward, and it's not a page turner in that sense. So I would say that that is maybe something that people might not like about this book. For me, I did feel like it is a book that takes time to read. You don't kind of devour in one sitting. You need to sort of savor it piece by piece and come to it when it feels right. What I liked about this book is, apart from some of the relatable life challenges that the characters are facing, I also think that there are some really nice passages in here that I have flagged actually, because I own this book, I get to flag it with the little post-it stickies, and maybe I'll share some of the passages that I liked a bit later. So I quite enjoyed it. I think the only thing that stood out to me was that I thought one of the characters could have been better described. So I think the character is Chung So, the one who knits in the bookstore. And I don't know why, but my initial impression is that she was super old. But I think in the 70% mark of the story, I find out that she's maybe at most in her mid 30s. It was quite jarring to find out because in my head I had this sort of mental image of this old harmony, but then turns out, it's this middle-aged lady. So that was jarring in a sense, but I guess the age doesn't really matter because it's more about her life and what has happened to her and what she's doing. When I came to the book at different times in my life, different parts resonated with me. And I think this doesn't only affect me as an individual, but I think different people who come to the book will relate to different parts of it, and they'll be able to take away different parts of the story. And this sentiment, maybe I have just plucked it directly from Celine Song's mind, because I just watched this video with Celine Song talking about her movie Past Lives. I'll link that video down below. That's kind of a tangent. But yeah, the thought is that it doesn't matter where you are in your life. I think you will be able to find something that you can take away from this book, or that you can resonate with, or at least sit with the characters in a way. In terms of the writing style, sometimes I found that it felt quite staccato. There weren't really any long, winding sentences that you might expect in a literary novel. Okay, that's from me, a person who doesn't read literary novels. So what do I know? I don't think it's a bad thing that it was written like this. I thought it was quite unique, and I do wonder if it is an effect of translating from the Korean, and maybe this is what the Korean language sounds like if you had to translate it into English. So yeah. I think there are some people who would call this book a little bit navel gazy, but sometimes you just need that. And I feel like I do, and I do seem to enjoy these kinds of navel gazy books. I mean, that's why I enjoy memoirs so much, because I mean, memoirs, like the whole point is the navel gazing. I think maybe this will be a personal preference. If you don't like the navel gazy stuff, then maybe stay away from this one. Some books like adventures. You read them, you go on the adventure, and you experience new things, and you have things happen to you. And you get to the end. It's kind of like Ready Player One from our last book club meeting. Then for this book, welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop. This book is like a place that you go to, or a memory that you revisit. I don't think it's like an adventure that you go on, but the good thing about that is that I think you can always come back to the book time and time again. It's a book that you can reread in that sense. There are some books that aren't really built for rereading, and I think this isn't one of them. So that's one of the plus points. I know that the author has written, or had written, essays before this book was published, and those essays were sort of like personal essays, which I suppose is why maybe that style carried over into this novel. I mean, that's my theory. I don't know whether I maybe synthesized this theory from hearing her talk at different events, or it's just something that I came up with. Okay, in the next section, I suppose I would usually talk about my thoughts about the story, but since the story isn't really plot heavy, it's more about the characters, maybe I'll go a little bit into what I think about the main characters and some of my thoughts. I won't go into all of the characters. There are quite a few of them, and I feel like the joy and the value that you get from the book is from reading their stories yourself. I think I wouldn't really be able to do it justice by just sort of giving you a spark note summary here. I mean, part of the fun of it is hearing the words from the characters themselves. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the characters. The first character is, of course, Yongju. So Yongju is the owner of Hyunamdong Bookshop, and she opened up this bookshop after experiencing some life struggles, I guess, and her story unfolds itself gradually. So you don't really know what happened in her past and why it is that she is opening the bookshop now. I think she just mentioned at the beginning that she wants to do it, but I think the story sort of unfolds itself later on. I think the why isn't that important. Like, it's not a mystery in that sense, but it's just something that adds to the different layers of the character and to, flesh them out. So, as the owner of the bookshop, she's the anchor for the whole book. I mean, other than the bookshop itself, I don't think the bookshop in this case is a character or as strong a character as Yongju herself as the owner. So she's the catalyst for all of these different people in the neighborhood coming together in the bookshop, meeting each other, interacting, and then also, moving through this moment in their lives. I think what I really enjoyed about Yongju, or the chapters where we get into Yongju's head, is the minutiae of running a bookshop. So at the beginning, she starts off figuring out how many books to order, how she's going to interact with customers. When she opens up the bookshop, she also opens up a cafe, and she hires a barista to help make coffee for the store. After all of this, after a while, when she gets the hang of it, she starts hosting book talks and other events. She also starts a book club, etc. And she tries to find ways to make the bookshop a part of the community and make the bookshop survive for as long as possible, because it is a place that she feels at home in, and it's a place that she loves so much. So that's why she puts in so much effort into cultivating the space. So all of these things that she does for the bookshop, I think that's the fun part of the slice of life in this novel. I'm sure a lot of people who like books will enjoy living vicariously through her without actually having to start a bookshop themselves. There is a quote in the book that I liked. It's about Yongju's experience with opening up the bookshop. And she has a lot of doubts, I think, throughout the novel about whether this is a good idea and how long she can do this. And I bookmarked this quote because I thought it was interesting. Bookshop owners live day by day, hesitant to plan too far ahead. This was why Yongju had told Minjun that his job might expire after 2 years. At the time, as with now, she'd had no idea where the bookshop was heading. Despite the bleak outlook, independent bookshops continued to sprout up in the neighborhoods. A thought crossed her mind. Perhaps the business model of an independent bookshop was one built on dreams, whether it was a dream of the past or the future. Those who start a bookshop probably dreamt of doing so at some point in their lives. And when they woke up from the dream a year or two later, they would close that chapter in their lives. As more and more bookshops sprouted up, so did the number of dreamers. Bookshops that were 10, 20 years old were rare. But 10, 20 years later, independent bookshops would still exist. So another character that I think is worth talking about, or that I'd like to share, is about Minjun, the barista. So this is the second character I think that we are introduced to in the book. So Minjun is a graduate, a university graduate who has been working part-time jobs since graduation. I think when I first got this book 2 years ago, I happened to be at that kind of life stage, so I can see how this character would be relatable to a lot of maybe university undergrads or fresh graduates who are entering the workforce. Like in Singapore, I think the Korean education system is even more competitive than here. And there's this pressure on youth to succeed, whatever that means. So they work and work and work towards this direction. And that's what Minjun did because that's what he was told to do. Once they graduate and they enter the real world, they start interviewing for jobs and they start facing the real world. And it's not necessarily because he keeps getting rejected for the job. I think if he really cared about the job or cared about the kind of career that he was going to build, he would have, continued in the job hunt and everything. But it probably compounded the kind of disappointment and the frustration because he didn't really know what he actually wanted, because that purpose that he had been working towards his entire life has sort of amounted to graduating, getting his degree, and then the inevitable question is, now what? So I think this question about the heart's desires is also present in all of the other characters in this book. So their dilemmas come in different shades or different forms, but I think all of them are ultimately about confronting that pressure to do one thing, whether that pressure is internal or whether it's from society, their family. So confronting that pressure against their desire to do something different. So throughout the book, we watch all of the characters sort of wrestle with this. And then in the end, I'm going to spoil you. In the end, they all come to terms with the struggle, in a sense, or they make a decision and they see where it goes. So I think this is maybe one of the key reasons why a lot of people say that this novel is a comfort novel or it is a cozy novel. It doesn't try to say that by making the right choice, your life will turn out well. Instead, we see these different characters make peace with their choices and then approach those choices with confidence that they will emerge on the other side. Just to sort of back this up a bit, in terms of that pressure to do one thing and their desire to do something different, there's two other characters. So there's Jimmy, the owner of the coffee roastery. She's facing trouble in her marriage with a husband that she can't seem to get along with, and we sort of see her wrestle with this idea of, oh, should I stay in this marriage and try to continue working with it, or should I leave? So I think the last character that I want to talk about is Songwoo. So this character, I feel, doesn't appear to have as much struggle as the other characters in this book. So Songwoo is one of the writers that Yongju invites to the bookshop to give a talk about his book. So his background is that he is a blogger that writes about writing and writes about the craft of writing. I think through him, we get to see the bookshop with fresh eyes, because when we first go into the book, we see it from Yongju's eyes, we see it from Minjun's eyes, and that's when the bookshop is sort of slowly getting off the ground and it's sort of stuttering along at the beginning, right? And then someone sort of comes in maybe later on as the bookshop has started to, what do you call it, pick up steam or step into its stride, um, something like that. That's when Songwoo comes in and he sees the bookshop and we get to see it with fresh eyes and we get to see Yongju from the outside. We do occasionally see Yongju through the eyes of Minjun, the barista. I think his view of her is more of that of a boss slash employee relationship. But to be fair, at the beginning I was a bit curious to see if something romantic was developing, but when Songwoo entered the picture, I think it was quite clear that the story was going to develop in a different way. Yeah, that's kind of a side point. All that to say, for me, what stood out is that we have this image of Yongju based on the way that she views herself, and then when Songwoo comes in, we get to view her from the outside, from a different perspective. I think it's interesting to see how that feels different. Like how we feel on the inside doesn't always translate to how people perceive us. That's just my interpretation. Maybe there's nothing there. The last point, I think, to break the fourth wall a little, I think Songwoo's character also allowed the author to talk a little bit about her thoughts on the craft of writing, which must have been fun for her, I guess. Youngju comes from maybe a more reader perspective, and she talks about the books that she likes, etc. But for Songwoo, he has more of a writer's perspective, and we get to see a bit of that in the interview that they do. Just to conclude that section, I guess Youngju eventually starts writing a column about books or about the bookshop, something like that, and Songwoo kind of helps her with that column, and their relationship slowly develops from there. Okay, in this next section, I just wanted to share some of the quotes that I liked. Okay, here. So this quote is from one of the author interviews that Yongju does with an author that comes to a bookshop. The quote reads, "Books are not meant to remain in your mind, but in your heart. Maybe they exist in your mind too, but as something more than memories. At a crossroads in life, a forgotten sentence or story from years ago can come back to offer an invisible hand and guide you to a decision. Personally, I feel like the books I've read led me to make the choices I've made in life. While I may not remember all the details, the stories continue to exert a quiet influence on me." Yeah, so I think that was interesting. In this entire interview, I think there's a lot of thoughts about books and reading that people who read will probably enjoy. And the second quote and the last quote that I wanted to share. Okay, so there's this conversation that happens between Minjun and Yongju. I'm not entirely sure at which point in the story that they are talking about this, but I suppose they are. In this case, I think Minjun is sort of thinking about his life and what he should do. And so he has this conversation with Yongju. So Minjun says here, "Dissonance before moments of harmony makes the harmony sound beautiful. Just as harmony and dissonance exist side by side in music, life is the same. Because harmony is preceded by dissonance, that's why we think life is beautiful." Yongju says, "That's a beautiful way to put it." Minjun lowered his head again. "I've been thinking about it today." "What is it?" "Is there a way that will accurately tell us whether the current moment we are living in is harmony or dissonance? How do I tell what state I'm in now?" You won't quite know while you're in the moment. It's only when you look back that the answer is clear. Yeah, so I think that's another section that I quite enjoyed. They have an interesting conversation about that. So, how we feel life and how people may perceive our life to be, and also how we perceive how other people perceive us. Was that too much? But yeah, I thought that was interesting. So there are tons of these interesting quotes and introspective things within this book. So if these quotes were interesting to you, then I think you will enjoy the book a lot. All right, now I'm going to move on to the less serious topics. I wanted to talk a little bit about the different covers that the book has. So for the English version that I bought, it was the first version that was published. So this is, I think, the winter cover. And I do think it's nice. I love the colors. I love the kind of glow from the bookshop. And it sort of gives off the vibe really well. Or like it translates, it translates the vibe of the novel into a book cover really well. I know that a while after this release, they released a spring cover the next year, which is also really pretty. I have the Korean version as well, and it looks pretty similar to the first English version. As part of the release special at Kino, I also got a nice cup holder which I used to carry my iced Americano while I was in Korea. Okay, in the next section, I did mention that I have the Korean translation, and honestly, in this section, it's more of a question rather than a statement. I do wonder how the English translation compares to the original. Not because I want to be judgmental or because I want to rate the translation in any way. I can't translate it myself, but I think maybe more from a language nerd point of view, I'm curious to see how the original may feel different from the English translation just by the virtue of being translated. I'm sure that she did a lot of research, as Shanna said actually during her talk, which I found really interesting, is that I don't know if cultivated the relationship is right, but she had a lot of back and forth with the author herself to clarify certain things about the book that may be implied in the original version, and in order to be able to translate that for the English audience, she needed to get clarity in terms of what the author was trying to convey. So I did think that that process was really interesting, and I do wonder whether the ways in which this was done is different in the English translation and in the original. So I'm just really curious, because especially because the original was so popular in Korea, which is what warranted its translation in the first place. Yeah, so that's more like a curious point. Right, so in terms of my last section, I want to talk about the idea of cozy fiction. In terms of cozy fiction, I think 2024, I hate to talk about trends and genres in this way, but I do think 2024 we saw a lot of like cozy fiction that came out or became popular. There was that whole wave after this book. There was really like this big wave of Korean cozy fiction that came out. I'm not sure if I would gravitate towards cozy fiction because, as I said, it's not page turning kind of genre, right? But it's a place that you go to when you really need that place. So if you are not in that headspace, then you wouldn't really read the book. It depends. Maybe the genre will grow on me. In terms of other Korean translated literature, am I interested to continue reading? I would say yes. I'm definitely interested at least to step into Han Kang's work. As most people should know, she won the Nobel Prize in Literature last year. Or was it earlier this year? I remembered hearing a lot about her books even in the past, and I think she's already like a really decorated author in her own right. And then this like the Nobel Prize really sort of just skyrocketed her into international renown. That's all my kind of rambly thoughts about Welcome to the Hyunamdong Bookshop by Hwang Bo-Reum. And that's a wrap for meeting number 2 of the Casual Book Club. As always, all meeting notes will be typed up by our club secretary and posted on the website. You can find all the links below in the description box. If you enjoyed this meeting, do leave us some feedback below. Our club president's email is also in the description box if you'd like to reach out. You can join the club by clicking the subscribe button, or if you prefer emails, you can subscribe to the club president's email newsletter. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.